Flashback to the 60s. Welcome today to Pushing Technology to the Limit. I have found some interesting things in my basement and out in the garage that is historical now. And I found some old video game consoles. Well, actually I knew I had them, I just didn't know exactly where I put them. But I also have some stereo equipment that's old, and actually I don't know how old this one computer is that I'm going to show you first off when we're down there. And but it looks like it's at least about 1960. And so I thought whoever watches this movie might get an interesting on the historical end of things. And just to show you what hard drives were back then. This is your standard hard drive today. And this one's SATA. It's a Western Digital. You should be amazed of what this hard drive in this old computer looks like and how big it is. I'm going to take you down there now and I'm going to show you actually what those hard drives look like and compare them to today's modern hard drive. It is amazing. This is a computer. We don't have all the parts and it doesn't work anymore, but it used to. My dad brought it home from his work at Ironics in Ithaca, New York. And we live between Ithaca, and so he worked there. And check this out, a floppy drive. That's a real floppy drive. Check out the floppies that are in this thing. I actually found a floppy still inside that hard drive, or in the floppy drive. That was pretty amazing. It's in pretty good shape. I don't remember what we used this computer for, but I do remember that my brother and I years ago, down in the basement here, we used to play some kind of worm game on it, and it was all DOS. It was a pretty interesting game. And I'm not sure what they used it for testing over at the Ironics Incorporated, but here is the actual plate if you want to see it for historical purposes. And that little box right here that I have my hand on, it's hard to see, but that's an actual hard drive. That thing is a tank. And see how big that hard drive is? That's the size of 2 drives of a standard drive today. I can't pull it out. I'm not about to do that. Well, look at this thing. Look how big it is. All the circuit boards in it. And now if I take 2 of our standard drives that we have today, that equals that one, except that the drive that's in there is a little bit wider. Look how long that thing is. That is a monster piece of equipment. Now we don't, I think I might have already said this, maybe I didn't, but we don't have the monitors, keyboard anymore. There wasn't a mouse back then. It was all DOS. Look at the back of that main unit there. It takes 3, let's see here. No, actually this main unit takes 4 CPU fans. That is a big hot machine. Look at those cables. I've forgotten all about this piece of equipment being down here. Although they do have a standard, well actually it's not standard anymore, but back then, and back when 2004 was, computers were around, these were a standard cable, and it's an IDE chain. They've used those things for a long time. It does have a standard socket for a power cord on modern computers, but this one actually has its own fuse box. Right there is the fuse compartment in this unit. So it's going to be kind of hard to see here inside the machine here, because it's pretty deep. I'm surprised. But a machine this big, and why wouldn't it be? And look at that circuit board. I don't know if you guys can see that on the camera or not. But that is amazing. Well, I was turning this thing around, back to put it back where I had it. I found more 4 more floppies. Now these things really flop when you move them. Look how floppy that thing is. Here's another thing I forgot to show with the Ironics computer, was the other label. One thing about those big computers with those old hard drives, they only would hold 500 megabytes of hard drive space. That is pathetic compared to today's technology. So now I can take the size of that one drive down in that old Ironics computer, put them together like this, and I have 3 terabytes, because the other one underneath it is a 2 terabyte Western Digital. It is amazing how far technology has come. And here's my first video game console system. It was an Atari 2600. It's pretty amazing how I got this system. My grandma lived on a curvy road, and some guy came through, and this Atari bounced right off his truck. Never came back to claim it. She put an ad out and tried to get whoever to claim their video system, but never did. And I have all the original controllers and all the games. I got 32 games for the system. And I have other people have given me the another 2 more Atari systems, another 2600, and they all work. I just don't have the power supply for it anymore, or the old fashioned TV box to plug it into your coaxial input on your CRT TV. So these 2 joysticks right here are the original joysticks, except the joystick on the left goes to a 7800 Atari, and the one on the right is a 2600 Atari. Now, I found with both systems they are interchangeable, so it doesn't matter. And I have the original paddles for some games, and I also one time when Radio Shack was having a special, I bought this advanced Atari joystick. Actually, I got 2 of these. There's some more in the bag, but there's just so much of this stuff, it's hard to get it all out here so you can see it all. And I also have some kind of a paddle controller over there, and as far as I know, these all still work. Here's the 7800 Atari. Now, these are a little bit dirty because they're in storage. But other than that, I didn't really like this one as well as the 2600, just because it was a nicer unit and everything was just neatly organized. And this one doesn't have very good organization. Doesn't have some of the features that the 2600 has. So here's a classic stereo system. It's a I don't know if I know if the store went out of business in Ithaca. It's a Sears and Roebuck 8-track stereo with a phonograph and cassette deck in it. Has an automatic turntable in it. This is back when they were switching from 8-track and phonograph to a cassette tape, to an actual what they had back in the 90s. And actually the radio was the best. I like those old radios the best out of the digital ones, because when the radio station would kind of go out of whack, you could just tune it in. But now with these digital radios, you cannot tune them in. It's just either on or off. It's ridiculous. Some of the old, a lot of the old stuff was the best stuff, and this actually has good sound. It has really good bass to it. And nowadays you get these new stereos and they're plastic junk speakers, and I don't like them. They just don't have any bass in them. This thing can just really just because of the size, not because it's big, but because of the way the speakers are built. This thing sounds good. I'm going to show you inside the actual stereo system. So there's the cassette deck, and it's not even automatic, it's just auto stop. It was way back before they even had automatic reverse cassette decks. There's the phonograph player. You can put probably like 5 records on that thing and walk away from it. I'll tell you one thing I didn't like about the 8-tracks, and I did have a bunch of 8-tracks back in the day when I had this running. It was so noisy. I would try to take a nap with it, and when that thing go click, it would wake you right up. Now, if you're wondering, like me, why do they call it 8 tracks? Well, I never understood it when I was a kid, why they called it 8 tracks. But someone not too long ago told me why they called it 8 tracks, because this thing has only a 4-track selector on it. And it just goes click when it switches. And well, somebody back in those days thought that the sound would sound better on a tape that had 4 tracks on it. So it was 4 for the left channel and 4 for the right channel. So that's where the 8 tracks come from. And when they went back to cassette tapes, they went back to 2 channel. So here's a computer that has one of those hard floppy disks in it. This machine still works today, and I refurbished it last year. The only thing that doesn't work on it is a floppy drive. I uninstalled the cables because we didn't need them anymore. Back in the olden days, before they had USB, they had serial ports and parallel ports. And the parallel port was for your printer. And that thing was dog slow. And they also had PS2 for keyboard and mouse. Let me tell you one thing. People think when I do a search on the internet that PS2 stands for PlayStation 2. So like when I go to Amazon to find a PS2 adapter, they think I'm talking about a PlayStation 2 adapter. So there's a lot of confusion out there what PS2 is. But a PS2 is your control for your computer with the keyboard and mouse. Nowadays you can buy the adapters to go to the USB ports on your computer. So if you don't have a PS2 connector on your motherboard, you can always buy one. For I'm not sure how much they cost now. I haven't bought one in a while, but they're not too expensive. Now we move on to TVs. It's pretty amazing. This thing is big. And I can't really say amazing, but compared to today's technology, they're almost paper thin. And back when TVs first came out, I had one of the old, well, it wasn't as old as the ones that my grandfather dealt with, but they were still Zenith TVs, and they actually had tuning knobs and channel knobs. And nowadays, with the TV sets, you cannot even adjust your channel if you have, you know, off-air antenna. Now either you get it or you don't. And now with the HD, it's even worse because it's there or not, and it's hard to get it in sometimes, depending on where you're at and location. How big that thing is, and deep. Nowadays, you can buy a TV like this. This is one of the, well, this isn't as new as it used to be. I've had this for a while, but it's thin. I mean, those old sets would cover up this entire table. You can see how much space is in the back of that TV set. Also, here is another device that's antique. It's a VCR. This was the best video machine to have because you could rewind it, fast forward it, and pause it without losing your spot. Nowadays with DVDs, you have to get back to your spot where you were at when you shut it off. Although I do know that from other technologies that there was a previous player which was called the Beta machine, and they were large tapes, bigger than VHS tapes, and people told me that they are better than VCRs. But yes, I do say that the VCR was good, but the fact was that the tape would wear out, and then you would have lines through your video and sometimes loss of sound, and it goes on and on and on. But otherwise, back when technology was around, it was a good technology. This was my first video camera I ever bought. It's a VHS camera. It still works today. I've used it in the past. Very nice camera. Actually, they're better than these digital cameras that I'm using now. And there again, you could have all sorts of tapes and keep them, and not like these DVDs where you might get it and sometimes the DVD gets scratched and you lose your video. Well, not with VHS tape. You could bang that box up and smash it to pieces and then put it in another case and it'd still play. They were basically indestructible if the tape was still in perfectly good condition. So I'll see you next time on Pushing Technology to the Limit.